Hello everyone. This is the 610 video for the lesson called Divisions. President Clinton won re-election, but challenges from Republicans and condemnation of his personal behavior led to his impeachment. The Senate trial resulted in an acquittal and Clinton remained in office, his public approval ratings high. At the end of his second term, he had balanced the federal budget and reduced the debt, and Vice President Al Gore had brought focus to the issue of global warming. At the same time, conflicts between liberal and conservative Americans that had been growing for over a decade pitted rural against urban and middle America against the West and East Coast as a new millennium began. Goals for this lesson: recognize the conflict between the Clinton and congressional Republicans by 1994, explain the goal of the Kyoto Protocol, the reasons for the agreement and the U.S. policy towards it, and describe the issues and opposing camps of the culture wars of the 1990s. For your lesson resources, grab your reading guide and/or lesson answer key, and there's also looking to the future sheet. And let's begin today's lesson, starting with reading pages 934 through 937. Clinton's troubled second term is where we will begin. Clinton's early missteps regarding gays in the military and health care reform, plus questions about his pre-presidential business dealings, left him vulnerable. In the off-year elections in 1994, Republicans tapped into voter anger and won control of both houses of Congress for the first time since 1954. Congressman Newt Gingrich of Georgia, a former college history professor, became Speaker of the House. Gingrich promoted a new conservative Contract with America, calling for sweeping welfare reform, smaller taxes, less government, and an end to congressional corruption. But the self-styled comeback kid, as Clinton liked to call himself, was poised for a strong second act. Clinton was able to point to evidence of economic prosperity, always a persuasive argument with voters. He had enacted tax cuts for the poorest Americans, as well as spending cuts large enough to balance the federal budget, and began to decrease the debt. Many Americans approved the call for welfare reform and the Republicans' Contract with America, and Clinton, despite stiff opposition from many fellow Democrats, worked with the Republican majority in Congress to reform the federal welfare system. The new legislation dramatically reduced federal aid to the poor and directed many who had relied on welfare into job training programs. By 1996, the economy was beginning to surge. At the end of 1995, when Clinton submitted his federal budget, Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich decided to oppose it. Gingrich insisted on deep cuts in social spending before Republicans would approve the president's budget. Without an approved budget or a stopgap resolution by Congress, the federal government could not operate. Clinton stood his ground rather than accept the cuts Gingrich demanded, and parts of the government did shut down. Democrats and Republicans tried to blame each other for the government shutdown. Clinton managed to make the case that Gingrich and the Republicans were responsible for the gridlock in Washington. Clinton had regained the upper hand. In the presidential race of 1996, the Republicans nominated Senator Bob Dole of Kansas, a hero of World War II and a seasoned lawmaker who asked for one more mission for the greatest generation. But with the economy surging and Americans enjoying a wave of prosperity, Dole was unable to mount a strong challenge. Clinton won re-election easily over Dole and Ross Perot, who mounted a second independent campaign, this one far less popular than his first. Protecting the planet. Bill Clinton's vice president, Al Gore, led efforts to raise awareness of environmental issues. In 1992, before serving as vice president, Gore published a book titled Earth in the Balance: Ecology and the Human Spirit, in which he wrote, "The world is at a critical juncture. We are invading ourselves and attacking the ecological system of which we are a part." He described dramatic changes in global climate patterns and specifically warned that global warming is a strategic threat. Many scientists have reported that so-called greenhouse gases, man-made gases, chiefly carbon dioxide, released by the burning of fossil fuels, were trapping too much of the sun's heat inside the atmosphere, thus causing global warming, a potentially catastrophic increase in the average temperature of Earth's atmosphere. Some scientists argue that the connection between greenhouse gases and climate change was still theoretical, and that further evidence was needed to justify legislative action restricting the use of fossil fuels. Scientific evidence of the potential harm of global warming was sufficient to prompt the representatives of many countries to sign the Kyoto Protocol, sponsored by the United Nations and named for the city in Japan where the treaty was adopted in 1997. The treaty set targets for the reduction of emission levels in each nation. To take effect, the Kyoto Treaty would have to be ratified by a sufficient number of nations whose representatives had signed it. The treaty took effect in February 2005 after Russia's ratification a few months earlier, but ratification by the U.S. Senate was another story. Prior to the Kyoto meetings, the Senate had unanimously passed a resolution advising the American delegation to refrain from signing any treaty that did not require developing countries, especially China and India, to reduce emission levels. The U.S. delegation at the Kyoto meeting signed the treaty anyway, but the Clinton administration, aware of the broad opposition, never submitted the Kyoto Protocol to the Senate for its approval. The issue was left for later administrations to grapple with. Early in 2001, President George W. Bush announced that he would not support the Kyoto Protocol because it failed to impose emission requirements on developing countries and because he thought it would hurt the U.S. economy. A number of states and cities responded by independently endorsing the protocol or similar programs. The treaty remains mirrored in the uncertainty of global politics. Culture wars. In America in the 1990s, debates between conservative and liberals seemed to some observers to be escalating to new levels of tension and animosity. These debates were not limited to political issues, but embraced questions of values, morals, and behaviors. Nor were the debates limited to the halls of Congress or state and local legislatures. Instead, on the internet, talk radio, and cable television, many heated voices broke into raucous arguments over America's direction. The voices seemed to fall into one of the two increasingly rigid and distant camps. With each new charge and countercharge, the camps seemed to grow more hostile toward each other. On certain hot-button issues, for example, abortion or gun control, the two sides seemed to talk, or rather yell, past each other. On one side were conservatives, many of them on the growing denomination of evangelical Christianity or in traditional Catholic parishes. They saw an American drifting towards secular values, anything goes morality, and feel good hedonism. They were appalled by the open sexuality and profanity they saw and heard in movies, television, popular music. They were uneasy with feminists, suspicious of affirmative action, and offended by the movement toward gay rights. They championed the traditional nuclear family as the best guarantee of social and personal stability and were wary of various options that seemed to be displacing it. Many felt that public schools were miseducating their children and sought alternatives in private or parochial education. They remained deeply opposed to abortion. Mostly residents of small towns, the rural South and the West, they usually voted Republican. It was their votes that propelled the big Republican gains in Congress in 1994. On the other side were liberals whose sense of right and wrong had been shaped by the civil rights movement and the 1960s counterculture. Though many were religious, they tended to favor a clear separation of church and state and denounced movements like the moral majority that seemed to be willing to legislate morality. They supported women's rights and gay rights as extensions of the civil rights movement. They regarded abortion as a matter to be decided by individual women, not the government. They did not necessarily approve of the increasingly permissive popular culture or sexually explicit media, but they resisted attempts to censor or otherwise limit freedom of expression. Their numbers were larger in big cities and on the Atlantic and Pacific coast, and they tended to vote for Democrats. Of course, the nation did not in fact divide neatly into two opposite sides, and many people took to one side on one issue and another side on another issue. Nevertheless, the culture wars, as they came to be called, dominated national debate during the Clinton years. On television, radio, and the internet, arguments flared over such issues as federal funding for art that conservatives considered obscene, or Confederate flags flown over southern state capitals, or displays of Christian symbols on government property. These, excuse me, These skirmishes had a profound effect on politics from town halls to the White House. Activists on both sides argued that the nation's soul was at stake. The loudest voices seemed to speak with the least civility. In such a charged atmosphere, many people were inclined to stake out extreme positions that seek any reasonable middle ground of compromise. All right, let's go back to read this one inset. The Montreal Protocol. The Kyoto Protocol was not the first contemporary example of international cooperation to address a shared environmental danger. As early as 1987, the leaders of 24 nations, including American delegates from the Reagan administration, signed the Montreal Protocol. This agreement phased out production of ozone-destroying chemicals. Why was this agreement so important? High above the Earth's surface is a kind of global sunscreen, a layer of ozone, a gaseous chemical cousin to oxygen, that protects the planet from the sun's destructive ultraviolet rays. In the early 70s, scientists discovered that man-made chemicals were depleting the ozone layer. The chemical culprits, called CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, were used in refrigerators, air conditioning units, and aerosol spray cans all over the world. By agreeing to the gradual elimination of these chemicals, the nation signing the treaty took important steps toward helping the ozone layer begin a slow process of repair. By 2009, 194 countries had ratified the Montreal Protocol. The treaty has proven effective and remains unburdened by the controversy surrounding the Kyoto Protocol. Okay, back to our other page. Okay, so we see some pictures here, protesting about gun control, protests about self-defense for civil rights, talking about gun control again. And now on to the section on Clinton impeached. In his second term, President Clinton found it difficult to get his legislative agenda passed due to attention focused on various scandals. A special prosecutor was investigating potential wrongdoing in a fraudulent real estate scheme during Clinton's time as governor of Arkansas. The investigation turned up no evidence of wrongdoing on Clinton's part, but the real headline-grabbing scandal erupted when Clinton was accused of having a sexual relationship with a young White House intern named Monica Lewinsky. At first, Clinton told his family and the country the charges were false, but evidence emerged that proved the allegations were true. Even the president's strongest supporters were appalled. Many thought Clinton should resign, following the example of Richard Nixon. Like Nixon, a Washington Post columnist argued, he has done things of importance for the country, but in every important way he has diminished the stature and reduced the authority of the presidency. Clinton vowed to stay in office, admitting in a televised statement that he had misled the nation and apologized repeatedly. Republicans set out to impeach the president, not for the sexual misconduct, but for lying about it in court and obstructing legal inquiries into it. Clinton responded with a confusing explanation of why he thought his testimony on the matter had been technically true. In the eyes of conservative Republicans who had distrusted Clinton from the start, the Lewinsky affair offered final proof that he was not only deceitful, but fundamentally lacking in morality, a child of the self-indulgent 60s counterculture who flagrantly violated his marriage vows and scoffed at ideas of duty and honor. Democrats were appalled by Clinton's behavior, but argued that it was essentially a private failing, not an offense that called for impeachment. Polls showed a majority of the public agreed with the Democrats and were willing to separate Clinton's personal misconduct from his political responsibilities. Many Americans were enjoying the nation's economic prosperity, for which they were inclined to give credit to Clinton as a leader, even if they thought less of him as a person. Republicans had enough votes in the House of Representatives to pass 2 articles of impeachment against the president. Thus, Clinton became the second president, the first was Andrew Johnson, in 1868, to be impeached. The impeachment of a president is a formal accusation of wrongdoing. The question of whether to convict him and remove him from the office is decided by the Senate. There, the Republicans fell short of the 2/3 majority required to end Clinton's presidency. He served out his term under a cloud of embarrassment. And here's a picture of Clinton apologizing to the American public. Okay, so we stop the reading here, and we will finish this video and start up the second part of it and finish off the lesson in the next video.